Well, we're now about to the end of the semester, and we've had a SUA packet that was all paper documents, and oftentimes we thought, well, why are we using all these paper documents? And really, I think it's helpful for us to work through, as I mentioned in the introduction to this module, when we actually have these paper documents in front of us and we handle them, we can take time and we can look and see what is in the documents. And then we can, at the end, go back and look at it and say, how could this have been made simpler? How could the system have functioned better, more efficiently, or more effectively? And that's when we start talking about IT. So we have a few modules on IT. These IT modules that I give you in this class are those things that are considered important for CPAs to know about IT. I am not an expert on CIS. However, I have worked in businesses that used IT. I have been involved with the IT department in implementing significant changes into their AIS systems. And the AIS systems were IT-based systems. So I have knowledge of the area. However, I'm not a CIS professional. Do I think you should study it? I think that if you are going to have a second major, or you're going to have a different area in which you study besides accounting, I would say IT or CIS is, those areas are wonderful. Management information systems technology, all these IT related areas are so important to accounting today that if you have this with an accounting degree, you're just going to be so valuable to the accounting profession. Information technology, or as we call it, IT. That is the electronic transmission of data. So whereas we were using data and we had data in front of us in all those documents, we're talking about electronic versions and into a usable information form. The full definition from the IT Association America is the study, design, development, application, implementation, support, or management of computer-based information systems. That's a lot, isn't it? We're really talking about computer-based information systems when we say IT. So when we talk about IT and we talk about AIS, we are saying the AIS is computer-based, and you're going to see another term coming up, which is a business information system. The CPA exam may ask you, what are the parts of IT? It's changed. Now, when I took the CPA exam, we had 1, 2, 4, and 5. We had the hardware, the software, the data, which is the thing that's being transformed or used, and then we came up with the people, and this is what we had. And we would say then, well, we had data and we had people when we had paper-based systems, didn't we? So what do you do when you add IT? You add hardware and software. And that's the extent of what I had when I was studying for the CPA exam. Now we have something else, which is the network, and you call it the internet. But if you call it the internet, you are limiting yourself because you're not talking about the discussion. That is a communication network which exists within the company, and you're not really talking about the other networks which exist. You could have one business that's communicating with another business, and say you have inventory and you're buying your inventory from that other business. Well, if your inventory gets low, you could automate the ordering of more inventory, or make it based on projections even. That is a network. That is a communication. That's a way to communicate with an outside party. It's not the internet because it's dedicated, right? So don't Don't cause yourself to only think of the internet when you're into 3. 3 does not just mean the internet. Yes, it's the internet, but it's more than the internet. Hardware, if you're listening to this at your laptop, that's hardware. And software, today, what's the word for software everyone use? Yes, apps, applications. So applications are a part of software. Not all software fits into the word application. So we'll talk about application software. There's a number of PowerPoints on IT. This is just the first one as a kind of an introduction. Business information systems. Okay, so we had IT, now another term, business information systems. Typically, when you're talking about a business information system, you're talking about an IT business information system. This supports business processes, decision making, and planning. So could you say an AIS is a part of the business information system? And I would say yes, you could say that. And remember that all business information systems today are integrated. They can communicate with each other. So it's not helpful to say that the AIS is a standalone, accounting general ledger or whatever system, because AIS is throughout the organization. We discussed that early in the semester. So when you have business information systems, it's broad, and it is supporting the whole business and all the business processes within it. Business information systems then have to do 4 things. They have to capture data. So the stuff we had on the documents, again, it's got to capture that. It's got to load it it has to be loaded into the system somehow. There are a multitude of ways that can be loaded in, but it has to be brought into the system. And then we have to take it and we have to manipulate it, process, change it, do something to it. It's easy for us to think about this in terms of financial reporting, because what we have to do is we're going to have to get the journal entries, and we're going to have to update our financials, and then eventually prepare financial statements, right? And we have subsidiary accounts we have to take care of. So it's easy to think of it that way. You have the data and the documents, somehow you've got to do all this other stuff to it. So that's processing. And then there's the output. You're going to communicate. You got to communicate inside the company, and you're going to communicate outside. And we were doing our transaction processing. We were doing a lot of communications outside. We were talking about ordering things. We were talking about making sales and communicating with people who are buying our product or potentially buying our product. Making payments and talking to people outside the company and that. So we have internal and we also have external users, and this is for the output or of a business information system. And then you have to store. We are always talking about protecting our documents or safeguarding those documents. So we are thinking then, if we're in IT and business information systems as IT, you're going to think about the files, and you're going to think about databases and how you store that. So when we were using paper documents, you began to see how things were linked together. When you transition, we called those linkages the audit trail, because we said if this document exists, then this thing happened, and if you didn't have a document, it didn't happen. Well, when you get into IT, you're talking about the documents being linked together, and the documents are linked together often in databases. So you have database linkages. You have a database which is comprised of a bunch of different documents that somehow are linked together within the database. And that's how it's going to be stored. The stakeholders in business information systems are all those people who are using it and affected by it. And if you want to go back and think about transaction processing and all the transaction processing we did in the SUA, You can easily think again about all the external, and you can think about the internal, and in the SUA we had 3 people. So that's my reference to the SUA. But here we are talking about IT. So what are the major tasks that are being performed again by information systems? Which one of these 4 do you suppose is right? Good, it is A. We have to take something, which is the data that's being input, it's captured in some way. And I mentioned that we'll get into this later, but is it going to be screenshots? Is it going to be a direct communication between 2 companies where 2 files are being linked together? Is it an individual sitting at a terminal keying things in? Is it someone at a terminal just clicking on a prompt? There has to be some input, okay? Some input. When you order online, you click on this thing or that thing and you order from Amazon. That's an input, okay? And then there's a transformation of it because it has to be transformed. It's a requirement for financial reporting to be transformed, but it also has to be transformed because in our SUA we had documents that were going out to external parties. We have communications with external parties, and you may not be sending back to them exactly what they sent to you. There's some transformation. Then you have to have a way to store the documents, right? Storage or protection of documents. And here we have that new output, right? That output that's being transformed. How are you going to store that? And again, just thinking about documents is limiting, but thinking about the transformation process, financial reporting, maybe that's helpful. And then storing what's happened. Store what you've got, okay? And with storage, you have to think about access. How often do I need it? Because with IT, the storage is, we're talking about a physical storage. And when we get into another PowerPoint, we'll talk about the schemata, which is an interesting word. We'll get into that. So yes, it is A. On this slide, you see a bunch of different links. So this is the one that I said in our introduction that you might want to go back and look at these. They're actually rather entertaining, some of these. The rich site summary is a format that is used so that you can update things and others can access it, and it'll be automatically updated for releasing of new information, or maybe it's new prices, or you use this when you're checking on Amazon or eBay or wherever you're buying your products from to see what the shipping status is. I have something coming in this week, and I looked today. I went to the original email where it said that I had purchased it, and it had a little link for shipping, and I clicked on it, and when I clicked on the link, it looks different than it did yesterday when I clicked on the link. And now it says it's moved from this location to that location. So this is an update, okay? This RSS is a way to update it all. So there is a video on that. Then there's cloud computing, and we hear about the cloud. In the cloud, it's in the cloud. And you know, what is that? What is the cloud? Well, it's a convenient way for us to accomplish things without having to have a big fixed cost for development of the software, for infrastructure, for the purchase of hardware. We can have someone else do all of that for us. So basically, it was determined that all businesses have some similar needs. One area, for example, is processing payroll. You know what's involved with payroll processing because you work through the SUA packet. But if you know all companies have payroll processing, all companies have to compute FICA, all companies have to determine or keep track of vacation days. and other contributions, voluntary or involuntary, and have to, at the end of the year, provide tax statements, right? So what if you had a company that was so efficient at doing that they could do it for billions, or I should say billions, millions of companies, right? Millions of companies. We'll just do what we've been doing for ourselves for all these other companies. And that's basically what cloud computing is. This one company will do it for multiple companies, and they're doing the same types of services. Maybe the state withholding is going to be different, or the taxes will be different based on income, or some other little changes between states or between municipalities. But once they have it programmed, they can do it for many companies. So why should I invest in software to do payroll when I can use the cloud? So you're going out into the cloud, the cloud, what the cloud means. It's not a very clever video. I think it's the first one. It's not a cloud, but it's sort of an imaginary thing that all your information goes to. Now, the discussion now about the cloud, of course, is security and whether it's secure or not, because there's so many companies using the cloud, and so many applications now. We had fixed assets. You could use it for your fixed assets, in addition to payroll. There are needs that are very specific to different industries where they will use cloud computing. Now, the last one, Boeing, is the one I mentioned because you see it says 737. That is the plane. It was the MAX that was involved in crashes and was caused quite a disruption in air traffic as it was recalled and grounded. But it's interesting because they are using IT, and how Boeing used it. It means IT. How Boeing used IT to actually sell their planes. I think it was very interesting. In accounting, the most common concern or area in the business information system is going to be transaction processing. Transaction processing modes, okay? And this is in our SUA. We had we had transactions that came about because of the documents. So we're really talking about document processing and how we can get that data from the documents, say, into the system. And it can be done through batch processing. And in batch processing, you take all the same sort of transactions, and all the sales invoices, all the accounts payable transactions, all the accounts payable payments, say, all the cash receipts, okay? And you put them all, so to speak, in stacks. And then when you pick up a stack, you call it a batch, and you would put each one of those into the system. And how do you make sure that you've got all those documents? I'll refer to it that way, even though we're in IT. How do you make sure you've got each one of those documents in that stack, which we're calling a batch, in the system? Well, you come up with some combination that's called a hash total. So if it was sales invoices, you would maybe total up the inventory item number. It is totally meaningless, right? But if the system processes each one of those, I'll call it loosely slips of paper, documents, then when the system runs through and captures all those inventory item numbers, it will run a tally and get a total. If you manually pick up each one of those that you want to be processed, and you total up each one of those, say, into some sort of a device to add it all up, and you say this is what the total is, then when it's processed and the machine processes it and says, my total doesn't agree with the total you say, then the assumption is that somehow when those individual items went through the machine, I guess I'll call it machine, that something wasn't done right, because each one of those documents should have gone through only one time, right? And all of them should have gone through. And if the system is reading everything properly, then that total should agree with your total. Well, here's the deal. I worked in batch processing, and the problem is if the person inputting all this stuff puts in the hash total, the total that they have calculated, what if they added up all those inventory numbers wrong? Yeah, that's a possibility, isn't it? Right? So the system processed it fine, but we added up the total wrong. I hated working with batches. But the batch processing is an inexpensive way to handle things because as far as the IT is concerned, it's doing the same things. If you have a sales transaction, the accounts are going to be the same, right? If you have a payment transaction, some of the same accounts are going to be hit, right? And talking about general ledger. So you can see it. It's simple. Everything is done the same way. But the problem with this is you have to wait until the end until you've got a batch, and when you've got a batch, then you're going to process it. Online processing, on the other hand, is a little more expensive because what you're doing is anytime anything at all happens, you're going to update. You update your database, update the information that's been captured, constantly updating. And the reason why you would use the online processing is because it gives you immediate changes to your database or immediate changes to the what do I want to say here? The world in which the viewer of the system sees. So with batch processing, you could say, has this thing been processed? And you would say, no, it hasn't been processed. But that doesn't mean it's not in a batch somewhere being ready to be processed, right? Because there's that delay. With online processing, it's immediate. And you could say, no, it's not been processed. I'm looking at it. It's not there. So here's an application for you then. Let's say you wanted to buy concert tickets and you didn't want to be sitting way back in the nosebleed section, right? You knew where you wanted to sit. Would you be more confident ordering it with an online processing or a batch processing? Right, you'd want online processing because you want to know where the next available seat is. Someone a few seconds ago bought that last seat you wanted. The batch processing wouldn't tell you that until all the batches were processed. Online tells you immediately what's available. So when you go online and you're getting your seat, you have picked your airline and it says time to check in, time to pick your seat, that's online processing. Two people can't sit in the same seat, right? Yeah, so you need online processing. It's more expensive, but it has a purpose. And then third, there's a combination. A combination means those things that need to be updated constantly are done that way. The others are done in batches. If you go to the bank and you see all the deposits made after 3 or maybe it's after 4 will be in next day's business, what are they doing? They are doing all the processing of the transactions for today at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Okay? So they are batch processing. If they were doing online processing, then every time you made a transaction, it would automatically show, and it wouldn't matter if you made a deposit at 4:45 or not, because it was constantly being updated. So you can use a combination of batch and online. If that's a possibility, figure out what things you have a need to know immediately about, and that would be online, or the things that can be delayed. Delay the things you can, it's cheaper. There's another link down here that you can watch. You can also search under batch processing or online processing. The online processing, the other word for that is real time. Real time. So if you see real time, that's the same as online. I don't know of another word for batch processing. Infrastructure. Infrastructure is the hardware of the organization. If it's centralized, it's all at one location, and their security is being very tight, and everything that's being processed is processed at one location. Decentralization means you have many different locations, and there is some interface with the main location, but most of the processing is going on at the remote or decentralized locations. And this sets us up for some interesting things happening. The other term for decentralization is distributed. If you see distributed network, that would be decentralization. So under centralization, then you have better and easier security because everything's being done at one location. There's consistency because all the decisions and the way that things are being processed is being done at that one location. However, you have a difficulty in that there is not the flexibility for each location to develop things that they may need for their particular processes. So if you have a company that's very different by location, you might want decentralization because then you let each particular office or location develop what they need to accomplish their specific tasks. But you lose control. That's what over here decentralization does. It loses control. And it says no traffic issues with decentralization. Well, that's because you're not having traffic. Traffic would be sending things to the central unit for processing. With decentralization, everyone's doing their own. But each location then is going to have to be accountable for what they have done. Otherwise, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So you don't want garbage in, so you have to make them accountable somehow if you're going to decentralize. Batch processing, a batch processing question. Okay, batch processing does not have anything to do with centralization or decentralization. It does not. It does not have anything to do with the audit trail because you're still going to have an audit trail. What batch processing is a method of inputting everything in. So it's a method of inputting. We'll talk about dedicated terminal entry and other things later, but batch processing is just a method of inputting. So the correct answer is C, accumulates transactions into groups, which you're going to have to do. All sales transactions, all payment transactions, each transaction type would be in a group, and it's cheap that way to process it, but it's not updated. So that's why it says delayed. It's not real time. You have to wait for it. An interactive system. An interactive system. Okay, so, gotta go back. Sorry about that. An interactive system is also another word for real-time online. These words, why can't we be consistent, right? Data files with records arranged sequentially. Well, that's kind of sounding like batch processing to me, isn't it? Processing of groups of data. Groups. I think they're referring to batches. Sorting the transaction file before processing. That implies you have a batch. So C is wrong. So this interactive system, which is a real-time online system, you are processing the data immediately. Information processing made possible by a network of computers that is dispersed throughout an organization. All right, this is decentralization. It is also distributed networks. So that's what we are saying, distributed, okay? Online is real time. Interactive is sometimes associated also with this real time. So A and B are kind of the same thing. Time sharing has nothing to do with it. This didn't even come up anywhere in our discussion today. Distributed data processing is decentralization. It's the same. A new purchasing system for just-in-time production requirements has been proposed. Okay, just-in-time means that they are producing things on the spot. Just as the order comes in, it's being done. So they're not building up their inventory. Users want access to current master file information at all times. Master file changes. How should they be done? So this is one you're going to have to say it's either going to be a real-time online interactive, or it's going to be batch. So what do you think if they want current master file information? Online immediate processing. Online immediate processing. So periodic entry with immediate batch processing, that makes absolutely no sense to me. So it's either going to be A or it's going to be D, because periodic entry describes batch processing, and then online with immediate processing describes real time. So it's either A or D would have been your choices, and since they want current information, it's going to be the online real-time answer. Okay.